Welcome to Missing Briefs, where we unveil the untold business stories of lawyers, their triumphs, and their trials. I'm Dominic, the founder and owner of Elevate Business Coaching, a Boston-based business coaching and consulting firm specializing in working with law firms and their lawyers to build, manage, and grow successful practices.
And I'm Bob Furlong. I'm a certified exit planner here at the Bullfinch Group. I help law firms create programs to attract and retain their best associates, and this creates a clear path for succession and with the eventual retirement for senior partners.
So, Missing Briefs, what's it all about? Well, it's about exploring and narrating the compelling stories or briefs of lawyers who have experienced significant challenges and successes in the business of law. What was their gap? What were they missing? What is it that they wish they'd known? Well, it's our pleasure today to welcome Chris Donnelly. Chris is a partner of Boston-based real estate firm Schofield Donnelly. Chris provides counsel to literally hundreds of condo associations, acting as their trusted advisor to boards of trustees, developers, and property managers. He's also an experienced litigator in real estate disputes that relate to things like title, zoning, permitting, and of course, commercial and residential landlord-tenant disputes. Chris is also active in his community, and I know for a fact that he is well prepared for our discussion today because he is an Eagle Scout and a member of the National Eagle Scout Association. Chris, how are you today?
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm well. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Bob. Pleasure to be chatting with you today.
So, Chris, you have a really interesting story, and you work with, a very specific practice area in the law. So let's get started by going way back to the beginning. When did you decide that you wanted to become a lawyer?
Oh, good. Good question, Bob. When did I decide I wanted to be a lawyer? There was never one light bulb moment. No, I think when I was a teenager, my dad encouraged me to think about it. I remember one time my dad is driving me to Boy Scout camp and we're sitting in the car and he just randomly says, "So, have you thought about going to college?" I must have been like 13 or 14 at the time. And I didn't have a good answer prepared. And to my dad, that was horrifying. He's like, "Wait, you haven't even thought about whether you want to go to college?" And I remember in that conversation, he said something about, "Oh, you should think about being a lawyer." And he had some reasons why that was a good idea. And at the time, I was probably really dismissive of it. What made me interested in becoming a lawyer was really just curiosity. I'm really curious about, forgive the simple term, how stuff works. The philosophy of law that governs, how do we resolve disputes as a society and how do we govern and implement fairness and how should public processes work? I think that part of the law is really interesting and it made me curious about becoming a lawyer and eventually led me to it.
Wow, that's really great. And when thinking about what area of the law to work in, how did you end up choosing real estate?
I don't know that that question presupposes that I chose real estate. Um, I it actually kind of found me in kind of my path to where I am now, or to at least finding, the career path that I ended up in wasn't completely linear. I During my third year, well, let me back up. Before law school, I went straight from undergrad to law school. Um, I don't know if I would recommend for other people to do that, but I had never worked in a law firm and I didn't really understand on a deep level what is it like to be a lawyer. And that also meant that I didn't have like a crystallized view of what specifically do I want to do when I become a lawyer. And I had different ideas. Like I did an internship at a prosecutor's office and I worked in a firm that did employment law and I did some other things. I worked for a personal injury attorney during law school at one point. And um, well, during my third year of law school, the subprime mortgage crisis and the Lehman Brothers collapse and the financial crisis really deepened. And for someone like me who didn't already have like a defined career path or connections in the industry, I was not prepared for that. So there were a lot of other excellent students at school that, you know, had already made arrangements for employment post law school. But for those of us who didn't, it was really rough. I remember sometime around law school graduation, I said something to my mother like, don't worry, I'll get a job by Christmas. And I succeeded if you consider that I didn't specify which Christmas I was referring to. Because several passed, and I worked as a paralegal at a law firm after law school, thinking, well, if I want to be a lawyer, I probably have to stay involved in the industry. I don't know if that was actually a good decision, but I kind of toiled in this dead-end paralegals gig,
Mm,
and I was doing all kinds of stuff to try to network and help myself kind of get out of this you know, this tangle where it felt like I was becoming unemployable. I'd been out of law school
mm,
for 2, 3+ years. I had never worked as a lawyer. It was really hard to make inroads. The job market was still really tough. And what eventually kind of, how I eventually found my way is I had the idea that I would get involved in volunteering on political campaigns.
oh,
I was living in Boston at the time, and I felt like, well, if I volunteer on a campaign, I can show people I'm just not some guy with a resume. I'm a competent, smart person. Um, so I ended up volunteering for a city councilor at the time who was running for mayor of Boston and committed myself very completely to this long election. And we ended up losing the election, but at the end, I contacted every lawyer that I had met along the way and basically volunteered to do free work for them.
mm.
And one of those lawyers, who was one of the co-chairs of that campaign, was Tim Schofield, who's now my law partner. So
Oh, that's
he
great.
had a practice at the time that focused mostly on real property stuff. He had previously represented some big property management companies, so he had a big portfolio of business in the condominium law space, landlord tenant stuff, real estate litigation, matters affecting zoning and title to land. And once I actually got into it, I found that I actually really liked it because there's new,
Mm.
different challenges every day. So that's maybe too long of a version of the story, but that's how it really found me versus the other way around.
I love that story is all about resiliency. It's not like, right? Not like in thing, especially that time must have been really, really hard to come out of law school. I think there's a lot of people that seem to forget what was happening in 2008 to 2012.
Yeah, I mean, it was really rough. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times, I remember a year or two after I got out of law school, titled The Lost Generation of Lawyers. And I did, reading it kind of it felt kind of vindicating. Like, see, it's not all my fault, but it also hurt a lot. I mean, you had to
Yeah.
reckon with the reality of, is this going to happen? Can
Right,
I
right.
do it? And yeah, it took a lot of time, a lot of connections, a lot of networking, and it ended up working out.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing. That's really great.
Yeah, it is a great story. So a couple of things I took away. I think I'm going to call you Curious Chris,
Ha!
right? You've heard of Curious George. It's Curious Chris. You always want like how does this work, right? What's the pathway? What's the mechanism? How do disputes? But it was curiosity that drew you to the law. You said real estate found you. It was just the nature of the environment where you're
Yeah.
looking for a job, and hey, if there's a spot there,
Hmm.
uh, it shows you. And you also said that you weren't prepared for the law either. And I think a lot of people are like that, unless you've grown up, in a legal family as such, uh,
Yeah.
and chosen. You're trying to figure things out. How does this work? What connections do I have? Uh,
Yeah.
and finally, your story about like coming out, post great financial crisis. It's not dissimilar to the environment today for
Yeah.
kids who have, my daughter included, who's graduated college, always assuming there's going to be tons of job and I'm just going to fall into
Yeah.
something, right?
Mm,
The
mm.
economy's it's good, but it's slow. It's slow right
Right,
now.
right, right.
So resilience, Bob, you put that nicely there. So you go to law school, you come out, it's hard to find a job, paralegal, political campaign, and you meet Tim Schofield. And
Yeah.
Tim, as a
That's
result of
great.
all that, you kind of, come under his wing. Maybe that's not the right term, but that's how you encounter each other, and you end up working together, and you can become partner over time. But I want to talk about like just initially, you didn't come from law. So what were some of the key challenges that you faced as you're, in your first job, clocking up some experience, cases, etc. What were the key challenges you faced building your practice?
When you ask that question, the part I think about is like the building my base of clients and like,
Yeah.
kind of sharpening my tools as a lawyer. So the part of my job that I think I like the most is the beyond the like philosophical parts
Hmm.
in like the problem solving is the entrepreneurial part of lawyering, like the business part of it. And I think, you know, one regret I have is that I didn't focus on that early enough in my career. I think when you're first practicing as a lawyer, it's stressful. You have, the anxiety of wanting to perform from
Hmm.
school. You're kind of trained that it's your job to know the answers and to be smart and to be right every time. And if you don't, there's consequences, etc. There's a lot of anxiety in that. It definitely takes time. It's definitely a challenge to like develop the skills over years to give you the self-confidence to then kind of
Yep.
go out and be more entrepreneurial and, feel like you can develop and
Yeah.
build client relationships and referral relationships. But I think, the biggest challenge that I think of, from start to where I am now is, the business part of being a lawyer. There's no training in law school about how to run a law firm or how to manage your time. And I think when you start as a lawyer, you kind of have this naive view that, oh, well, I'll learn all these cases and I'll learn all the statutes and I'll do all and
Hmm.
I'll sharpen my tools so I'll be like, I'll be one of the best lawyers in town. Anyone needs help with a condominium or this type of real estate issue, I'll be the guy.
Yeah.
And you can be the best lawyer in town, you can be the best lawyer in the world, but that doesn't actually provide the payoff that most lawyers are looking for.
Yeah.
If you want income and you want quality of life and you want some, time with family or whatever you want in your life, if it's outside the office, then that means you have to like, especially if you're a solo or small firm
Yeah.
practitioner, you need to like have mastered or have some facility with the business of law. And I
Yeah.
think, I've tried to do a lot of catch up on that in the last few years, but I guess any, advice I would have for like any lawyer starting their own firm is it's never too early.
Okay.
Even if you're thinking about starting your own firm someday, it's never too early to really take the time to try to learn the business part of law.
Yeah.
Like, because it's not just some learned profession where we're a failure if we're not like, working all hours of the day. It should be treated like a real business with a plan and structures and standard operation procedures. And, you have to manage your own time in your career if you don't want to be chained to your desk all the time.
Yeah. So I
It,
mean
it,
that makes total sense. So you go in, you get started, you're working with Tim. I'm assuming like your first few years, you're just trying to be a
Yeah.
good lawyer, right? Figure
Yeah.
out how
Yeah.
stuff works so you can be successful
Correct.
for your clients. You're not even thinking about, finding clients,
Yeah.
accessing clients. You're just trying to master, like almost like walk before you can run, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Sure.
get good at being a good lawyer first. But I'm curious, like how far into your career or your time with Tim, how far into it were you when you first began to think of the business side of the equation? You mentioned there the entrepreneurial side. When did you have that kind of a little bit of a shift in your thinking about like I can be a great lawyer and I can master all this, but there's other aspects of this that I've got to become. How far into your career were you when that kind of hit you?
Yeah, fair question. I mean, the embarrassing answer is it was probably after I was already a partner at the
Yeah.
law firm because I had some successes like in my practice, like representing people and, there was like substantive success
Sure.
and that led to partnership. And then once I became a partner, I really tried to indulge the entrepreneurial part of lawyering. Like, and my kind of naive view was like, oh, well, I'll go out and I'll find a bunch of clients and we'll just make a lot more money because there'll be more people paying legal fees. But I didn't do anything to like think about, well, when those clients get here, who's going to do that work if it's not me?
Yeah.
And do we have enough paralegals to answer the phone? And do we actually have a process to onboard those clients? And what really made me focus on those things is necessity, because I started being more serious and deliberate about business development,
Mhm.
and it worked. It turns out I was actually pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And
right.
once these clients start coming in one after another, you kind of have to figure it out. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, you know, it's like having a baby for the first time. You can't know how to do it in advance, but when the baby's there, it's like, oh gosh, I guess I have to do all these other chores and kind of reorganize my life in this way. And that's really how it's how it forced me to kind
Hmm.
of confront the business side of law. And had I done that earlier in my career, it would have set me up to really advance much faster.
It's interesting, Chris, because that's kind of the thread that we see that connects most of the podcasts that we've done.
Yeah.
We hear that consistently, and I think that's been our mission here. often is to expose people to the fact that, there's not a lot of training in law school or any training in law school that you're running a business, that you have actually a sales function in the job. It's
Sure.
not all about your knowledge and executing on stuff. It's actually getting people to trust and invest their time and effort and money in you to be their protector. And I think that we talk all the time. I was telling someone the other day how we came up with the name of the podcast. I think the missing part of Missing Briefs is that part. For a lot of attorneys, what they're missing is a business plan, and
Yeah.
it's never too late. But I think you're right. The earlier you get to it, many businesses don't have a real business plan. Forget about the law, they're manufacturers and retailers and whatever. But I think it's crucial for a law firm because you do have a cycle of business coming in and not coming in. So you have to have a plan for consistency and resiliency as well. So
Sure. Agreed.
that was thank you for sharing that because I don't think a lot of people are that self-reflective that they
Mm.
realize that. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, and very often people will say, of course, I have a plan. Don't be so ridiculous. Of course, I have a plan." And then you say, "Well, could you share it with me?" "Oh no, it's not written down. It's up
Yeah.
here." And it
Yeah.
sounds so ridiculous, but we're
Um,
all busy. But my next question for you, Chris, was going to be about, knowing what you now know. You become partner. What would you do differently? And you mentioned, well, I would have started business development a little bit earlier. And I'm thinking here about folks that might be listening saying, well, I know I need to have a business plan or I need to start working on business development, but what does that actually mean? And how do I do it? Right. So I'm just curious from you, how did you do the how part or what did you do? And then how did you do it? Because sometimes people will say, I know I need to build my business development skills. I just don't know how to do it. How have you been able to do it? Some
So,
tips.
first of all, this question is a compliment because it presupposes that I have figured it all out, that I have done it all.
Well, you said
And
you found that you said you enjoy the business development
yeah,
part, right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
well, is your question how to like focus on like how to do business development or how to like lay the plans to like set up for that?
Well, just some tips. Like if you could give your younger self a few tips, right, to
Sure.
advance. What were the two or three things you might say to younger curious Chris?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I mean, the real foundational thing that I think would have given, me a leg up earlier, maybe someone else who's thinking about being a lawyer. I think I mentioned this earlier, working in a law firm or in a legal setting before you go to law school.
mm,
Um, like even if it was like administrative, like even
Hmm.
working as the
Yeah.
office manager of a law firm before you went to law school, you'd be so better prepared to understand the day-to-day things that have to happen to be
mm,
successful. Because again, law school, it's just like issue spotting. Here's a fact pattern. What does the case law say? What should the legal answer be? That's
Hmm.
like this much of what
Yeah.
being a lawyer actually is. And having practical, like practical experience in a legal setting, what I think would be really valuable to someone who's interested in
Yeah.
being a lawyer.
Even somebody in undergrad just getting a part-time job in a law office just to see what actually happens. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like,
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. The other things I would say is like advice to my younger lawyer self, just being more deliberate about defining what support you need for your practice. And what I mean is, again, as lawyers, we're trained to believe that we can find the right answer. We're smart, we're skeptical, and we even have like rules of professional conduct that say if you get stuff wrong, you can get punished publicly. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
kind of spoken and unspoken pressure on lawyers, like
Yeah.
you need to have the answers. And I think a lot of lawyers like internalize that in a way that's unhealthy.
Mm.
And
mm,
we feel the need to be the hero.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the one to figure everything out, and I will orchestrate every single part of my law practice. And because I'm doing it, that means that I know it'll all be done correctly. But that's just
Yeah.
healthy because as your business development grows, you get in more clients. There's only so many hours in the day. So
right.
either you're working from, morning until night, and then you've given up your family life, The alternative, obviously, is being like what I was getting at, being more deliberate about what support you need.
Yeah.
So, like, thinking about, and you made a great point, Dominic, like, what's your plan? Is it written down? Like, have you defined, like, do you need paralegals to support your practice? What should those people be doing
Yeah.
specifically? How many of them do you need? What skills do they need to have? What process will they follow when, you know, I need to make service of process? What are the steps for that to happen? And I think the bad habit that a lot of solo and small firm lawyers are in is like, oh, well, I know how service of process is made. I'll just explain it to them and that'll be simple. Well, great. If that means you're explaining it over and over and over again, you're losing all this time.
Yeah.
And I will acknowledge it's really, really hard to kind of start from scratch and establish like a full set of SOPs and
Mm,
rules to govern a law practice, something I'm still working on.
Yeah.
mm,
It's part of the work that has to be done to manage your time and have, the lifestyle and payoff you want for all this hard work you've done.
right.
Because again, the alternative is you just do everything. You're working all the time, nights, weekends, etc., and you haven't actually derived what you wanted out of your career or your life. So long story short, being deliberate about setting up systems to
Yeah.
support your practice.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Some great tips.
You've had a great career so far. You're going to have a long and illustrious career for years to come. But then at some point, you'll hopefully exit into retirement or go off. Maybe you'll do something else in your latter years and mentor or whatever. When you're out of the law, how would you like the impact of your professional work to be remembered by others?
Yeah, that's a good deep question, Bob. And thank you for acknowledging that when I exit, I want it to be like into retirement
Yeah.
rather than exiting horizontally on a stretcher or
Yes.
something.
No
Um,
horizontal exits for Mr. Chris. No, no. Only vertical exits. You get to walk, even if it's with
cheer,
a cane.
cheers to that. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't really have any deep answer to that, just to say, I'd like to be someone who people trusted. I would like to try to be more involved in like thought leadership in the industries I work in. I don't necessarily have ambitions to be the greatest lawyer ever. Wouldn't that be nice? But just someone who is trusted, reliable, a good colleague, someone who knew their stuff. I mean, that's kind of general, but that's pretty much it.
I think that's great.
Hmm.
So, for those listening to the podcast who might have questions about your practice, might want to seek your help, or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch, Chris?
Sure, great questions. So people can find me on LinkedIn. Anyone can connect with me if they like. If you just Google me, our law firm website, you can find my email address and phone number. Email is always the best. I check that all the time, whether I like it or not. And yeah, happy to be a resource to any colleagues or anyone else.
Great.
Chris, it's been great having you on the show today. You're always fun to talk to, and I love your story of the windy path. And there's lessons there for all of us, whether it's in our professional, uh, aspect of our life or personal or whatever. But thanks for spending time with us today. You've been listening to Missing Briefs, where we unveil the untold business stories of lawyers, their triumphs and their trials. If you have an interesting story to tell about your own triumphs and trials of owning a law firm, or perhaps you know somebody else that does, just get in touch with us. I'm Dominic Grew.
And I'm Bob Furlong.
Until we meet again.
Thank you, gentlemen.